I'd like to welcome you all to Hillside Memorial Park. Thank you for gathering today as we honor the life of Lotte. Today's services, I do ask that everyone turn their phones off in order to preserve a clear stream for those streaming today's services from home. We're going to begin today's services by lowering Lotte into her final resting place, after which time Rabbi will be officiating today's services. Thank you.
Al Mikuma, Tavova Shalom. May Lotte's Sohn go to God in peace. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Because of COVID, we had to invert the traditional order of this funeral experience and start by lowering the coffin. We'll speak and share memories and lift up Lottie's name and her story as best we can in these really unusual circumstances, and then we will collectively participate in the greatest act of love, Chesed Shel Emet, and help with the burial process. To the many people who are joining us by video today, I want to thank you for being here with us virtually as we lay Lotte to rest with incredible love. I know that you want to be here in person. I know that it's very painful to be apart. Please know that we also feel your presence collectively, and it offers us great strength and affirms those who are here today as we collectively engage in this mitzvah of laying our loved one to rest with dignity. In the words of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, there is a season that is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing, a time for dying, a time for speaking, and a time for silence. There is a time for seeking and also a time for losing. We hold all of the complexities of this time as we come together in order to say goodbye to Lotte, but also to lift her up, to affirm who she was and all of the ways that her life was such a blessing to all of you, to all of us. We're going to turn to Psalm 23. Mizmor LeDavid, please feel free to join me. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echzar, bino deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinachaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'ma'aglei tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yinachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorarai dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi revaya. Achtov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti bevet Adonai la'orech yamim. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God gives me rest in green meadows and leads me beside still waters to revive my spirit, guiding me on the right path, for that is your essence. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil. Kosirevaya, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and kindness shall be my portion all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Adonai forever. So we're going to hear from a number of people today, just a few beloved family members and friends who were here with us in person, and we'll also hear some words from Noam and Amir. And then starting this evening and for the full week ahead, we're going to hear from loved ones, friends and family from all around the world who, because of the circumstances of COVID, aren't able to be here in person. I know Rachel will be speaking tonight and many others as well, and invite all of you to join together in this time of grieving and also celebrating as we lift Lotte up. I want to invite Ruth to come forward and start sharing some reflections about your beloved mother.
So as I begin, I would just like to, as Rabbi Sharon Brous did, acknowledge all the people who are here physically, our friends, dear friends who are here, and all the people, family and friends who are here, gathered from so many different places, including here in LA, and your presence this morning means so much to us. And especially our children, my brother Peter, and Carol, his wife, and his kids, Jennifer and Rebecca, and really our whole family. Our mother, Lotte, was born on October 2nd, 1926, in Nuremberg, Germany, the birthplace of both her parents, Marla and Heinrich Gutmann. She was the second of two girls, and we are truly blessed that her sister Liesel is here with us today via Zoom. I'll say more about Liesel and her relationship with my mother later. But first, a little family history. In 1931, when my mom was 5 and her sister was 10, their father, Opa Heine, moved the family to St. Gallen, Switzerland, for a year for business reasons. During World War I, he had established a branch of the family business in Switzerland while he was serving as a translator for the German army and was stationed at the Swiss border. After living in St. Gallen for a year, my grandfather did not think it wise to return to Germany, given Hitler's increasing popularity and the rise of fascist sentiment. So he and the family bided their time in Switzerland. As my mother shared with us for so many years, every year at our family Seder, just before Passover 1933, shortly after Hitler came to power, my grandfather invited all his and my grandmother's siblings and their families to join them in St. Gallen for Passover. Once everyone had arrived, he told them they couldn't go back. They couldn't see in Germany, he explained, what was clear to him from his vantage point in Switzerland, that it was simply no longer safe for Jews to be in Germany. Even though he was the youngest of the siblings, Opa Heine's family listened. After the holiday, the men returned to Germany to deal with the business, while the women and children stayed with my mother's family in St. Gallen. Eventually, the relatives all relocated to Italy, England, and Palestine, with most eventually going to New York. But my mother's 2 uncles, who went to Italy with their families, later ended up in Dachau, and while Opa Heine succeeded in gaining their release, in the process, he really worked himself to exhaustion, which probably contributed to the illness that brought his life to a premature end in 1939, when he was only 54 years old, and my mother was just 13. The death of her father was probably the greatest trauma my mother experienced in her life, even with the background of Nazi Germany and all the uncertainty and changes she experienced subsequently. In recent years, my mother frequently went back to her childhood memories in St. Gallen, especially those involving her father, still trying to make her peace with this terrible loss. There are other stories of her life in St. Gallen that my mom often returned to, especially in recent years, and our children and our friends who joined us around our Shabbat table over the years are familiar with them. Some of the most revealing about the nature of my mom's childhood have to do with her experiences in elementary school. As was the norm in Europe at the time, my mom was part of the same group of children for several years, together with the same teacher. For my mom, this meant being in a class of 22 Protestants, 22 Catholics, and Lotte, as she liked to say with a dramatic flourish. While she was the only Jewish child, and this must have included many instances of feeling left out and even isolated, my mom clearly had good friends, including her best friend Doris, with whom she maintained an active correspondence over more than 70 years after leaving Switzerland in 1941. She and Doris maintained a regular correspondence until Doris's death a few years ago. My mom also stayed in touch with her beloved elementary school teacher, Herr Ebele. Several of the stories my mom liked to share emphasized how Herr Ebele and other adults tried to include her and protect her at times, as the only Jewish child in their classes. On one occasion, when the local priest was speaking to the class, he apparently made a point of telling the children that Jesus was born a Jew to Jewish parents. My mother recalled her classmates' surprise and new respect for her. I believe that because my mother's experiences of being different were punctuated by such positive and memorable moments, she developed a sense of the world more nuanced and less threatening than would otherwise have been the case. And she also developed a strong sense of the power of individuals to affect the well-being of others and the society around them. My mother's personal experience of the critical role an elementary school teacher could have on a child was a key factor in her own eventual decision to become a teacher. My mother's family were members of St. Gallen's liberal synagogue, and their cantor was, like them, originally from Nuremberg, a fact that contributed to her parents' friendship with him and a sense of belonging for our mom. Our mother went to religious school and had stories of Seder at the cantor's home, as well as other warm memories of holiday celebrations in her own home, even as her day-to-day experience was primarily among her Christian friends. In 1941, as much of the extended family was gradually making their way to the U.S., New York specifically, my grandmother decided to do the same with her two daughters, prompted by her reluctance to be the only members of the family left in Europe, and also because of her concern for her daughters should anything happen to her. Liesel, my mother's sister, shared with me just this week that in recent conversations, my mother talked about how brave their mother was. First, in her readiness to move to Switzerland, where she knew no one, leaving behind all her family and friends in Nuremberg, Germany, and then again, just 10 years later, after making a life for herself and her family in St. Gallen, to leave it all behind to start over again in New York, needing to master a whole new language and new culture. I think that's true, and I think my mother and her sister were also very brave. Because of the quota restrictions on Jews at the time, my mother and her family spent almost 6 months in Cuba on their way to Ellis Island arriving in Ellis Island in early January 1942. My mother's first months in New York were surrounded by her aunts, uncles, and cousins, living closely together on the Upper West Side, which I imagine was a bit of a cocoon that she returned to each day after school. It was their cousins who helped my mom and her sister Liesel begin to get acclimated to American life and school. After a few months, they moved to Forest Hills, Queens, where my mom continued through high school and Queens College before getting her master's in educational psychology at Teachers College at Columbia. All this while continuing to live with her mother, Omi Marala, in Forest Hills. In 1951, my father's mother, Mama, heard from one of her friends about this young woman who had a similar background to theirs, living nearby with her mother, and decided that Lotte might be just the right woman for the youngest of her 3 sons, Hans, who had arrived in the U.S. 2 years before in 1949. Hans arranged to meet my mother when he next came to town. They went for a walk, and my father began making weekend trips to New York to see her. 2 months later, after only seeing each other on weekends, they were engaged, and a few months after that, they married. My mother joined my father in Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, where my father was working as a leather chemist at a tannery. And in Pine Grove, this small town in Amish and coal country, our mother discovered the joys and challenges of small town living, where everyone knew everyone's business, but people were also ready to extend a hand when anyone was in need. I was born in Pine Grove in 1954, and my brother Peter was born 20 months later. One night, an intense fire, fueled by the chemicals used in leather tanning and finishing, completely destroyed the tannery where our father worked. And with no other tanneries in the area, we moved to the North Shore outside of Boston, where he found work in the leather tanning and finishing field, and where we lived for several years in a Catholic working class neighborhood. When my father found better job opportunities in leather tanning and finishing in northern New Jersey, we moved again, and it was here that my brother and I spent most of our childhood. Wherever we lived, my parents were quick to join a synagogue, and I have good memories of celebrating the Jewish holidays as a family over the years, especially Passover and Hanukkah. Our mother loved and had a special understanding of children and found ways to work with kids all through her adult life. When Peter and I were very young, she ran playgroups at certain points in our backyard, and for a time she worked part-time at a Jewish nursery school. When we were in elementary school, She ran a preschool for children of low-income families in Passaic, New Jersey, and I have fond memories of going with her on the days we did not have school, but she did. Once we were living in Teaneck and had finished elementary school, our mom began teaching first grade in the public schools there. And as we would sometimes tease her, it took years before she graduated to second and sometimes third grade. My mom was a devoted and innovative educator. She was among the first who participated in team teaching and open classroom education that featured individualized instruction and learning centers. I especially loved reading her young students' journals, gaining glimpses of how they experienced the world, together with the fun of deciphering their creative spelling. I recognized even then that these journals exemplified several aspects of my mother's approach to education: the encouragement of every child to express themselves, and enabling her to see and get to know and respond to every child as a whole person. I remember taking pride in my mother's approach to education even when I was in middle school, and it only grew over time as I came to better understand the special opportunities that good education and the experience of a caring, interested adult can have on a child for life. One particularly strong memory I have of my mom, it's really a composite memory made up of many similar moments, is of her sitting in the kitchen in the evening after dinner, talking on the phone, leaning back in her chair with one foot up on the chair in front of her and the other leg crossed over, and with the long phone cord twisted up behind her. Her first graders' papers and journals and her lesson plans and materials for the next day are strewn over the table. At the heart of this memory is my mother's unhurried enjoyment of the conversation, unaffected by the hours of work still ahead of her. She was there for whoever she was talking with: her mother, a friend, a parent of one of her pupils, a colleague. It didn't matter who. My mom was always clear about her priorities, whether family or work. It was all about the relationships and being there for people, unhurried in her conversations, taking real pleasure in connecting with another person, listening with genuine interest, with insightful responses, and not too quick to give advice unless it was advice that was wanted. I especially came to appreciate this as a young mother myself, welcoming my mother's interest and loving support, as well as her perspective from her years of experience teaching as well as parenting, which I found she shared in a way that was respectful of the fact that we might see things differently. I believe my brother, Peter, and his wife, Carol, had a similar experience. My mother valued close friendships and maintained a number of lifelong friendships over both distance and time. Most of her close friends came from a similar German-Jewish background or were teaching colleagues, or both. In the last several days, I've been in touch with some of these wonderful friends of my mom's, going back to her first days of teaching when she was in her 20s, and when Peter and I were in elementary school and she was in her mid-30s. Two of my closest friends, one from high school and one from college, developed special friendships with my mom, independent of me. My mom was there for them, and they were there for her at critical moments over the years. But most important, as I look back throughout my life, was the gift of my parents' relationship with each other and their love for their children and grandchildren. I took for granted as a child, but came to value increasingly over the years, my parents' love for and devotion to each other. They truly liked and loved each other, and time spent together, whether tea and cake in the evening before bed. I should have started with the long breakfast when they could in the morning, but always, even when they didn't have time, a real breakfast. One of my mom's, and they were wonderful, wonderful life partners. One of my mom's favorite family stories was when Peter's kindergarten or first grade teacher asked him his father's name, and he answered, "Darling." Our extended family was a circle of close family that only in my teens did I realize was actually two different families that had come together through marriage. For both my parents, at least from my childhood perspective, our extended family was their primary social circle, and we often drove to Forest Hills on Sundays to visit my two grandmothers and other relatives of my parents. My parents' values came through in how they lived, consistent with their words. Among their highest values stood family and education. Our parents prioritized family in every way, from our childhood through their final days, reflected in my mom's questions and concerns she expressed every night when we talked over these last months and weeks. How is Rouvain? How are the kids? And where and what are they doing? And had I talked with my brother or anyone else in the family? In signing off, she wanted me to give her love to Rouvain, as well as me, and anyone else in the family who might be with us. When Peter and I were in elementary school, I developed asthma, in addition to the hay fever and allergies we all suffered from as a family. My mom started driving Peter and me into Manhattan from West Orange and then Teaneck, New Jersey, 1 day a week after school to have our allergies treated by a highly recommended allergist, Dr. D or Dr. Duretsky. We made these weekly car trips for years, and my mother's uncomplaining readiness after a full day of teaching to brave rush hour traffic into, through, and out of Manhattan with the regular accidents and delays that often resulted in our having to eat dinner on the way home because it got so late. This was emblematic of my mom's fierce mother bear attitude when it came to the health and well-being of her children. My gratitude came into its fullness when in my early 20s I realized that my asthma was really gone for good. Peter also benefited in the lessening of his allergy symptoms, though perhaps not as dramatically as what I experienced with asthma. Not surprisingly, both our parents loved being grandparents and fully embraced their new role over the last 35 plus years since our daughter Rachel was born. At first, we were less than an hour away over the George Washington Bridge on the Upper West Side, and we saw my parents at least once a week, with my parents retired and my dad taking care of Rachel one afternoon a week. And then both parents being with us for dinner before heading back to New Jersey. When we moved to Boston, they quickly transitioned to monthly weekend trips. And when we moved to LA, more than 27 years ago, they decided to spend their winters in Los Angeles and continued to play a significant role in our children's lives and our own. For about 3 months a year, they would pick up the kids from school. My mom would be available for homework in the afternoons. My dad taught our kids all to play chess, and my mom taught them how to do certain math computations in their head and encouraged them to express themselves in their own ways, as she had done with us and with so many other children over the years. Both my parents loved the outdoors and loved this aspect of being in Southern California. My parents' annual visits included regular family hikes in the Santa Monica Mountains and the Angeles Forest, and these are among our best memories of time spent with them. Judging from the photos, the same is true of my parents' weekend visits with Peter and Carol and their kids. This is a wonderful family tradition I'm sure will be carried forward. After my dad died in 2008, my mother's life was dramatically different without her life partner of more than 50 years. And in addition, she was now living in Los Angeles, where she had no real connection other than Rouvain and me and our kids, with only Amir still in high school. My mom got involved tutoring children through National Council of Jewish Women and was invited to serve on the board, which she did for several years. And while it proved difficult for my mom to meet and form new friendships with people her age in this city culture that can be so difficult to navigate no matter what your age, my mom loved being with our friends around our Shabbat table and theirs, and she very much valued getting to know some of them and their families over the years, feeling so embraced by them. Similarly, my mom felt truly welcomed and at home at Ikar, with a real sense of belonging. But at least as important to my mother was the fact, over the past 13 years since she moved to Los Angeles, that she could visit by phone with her sister Liesl and with her son Peter and his family so regularly, usually several times a week. These calls from Liesl and Peter, together with her phone and email conversations with other family members as well as friends from earlier periods of her life, kept her connected with the people she'd been closest to before moving to Los Angeles. As these additional contacts became harder for my mother to maintain, those with her closest family became even more important. And more recently, both Liesl and Peter called my mother on an almost nightly basis. One of my mother's qualities was that she was fiercely independent. In recent years, she would often say with a glint in her eye and pride in her voice that she'd lived as long as she had because she was stubborn. I hope you heard the capital S in that. But it was her desire for independence and a sense of her own dignity that was truly at the foundation of her sense of self. And her lived experience of independence was really necessary for her to be happy. This fact sometimes put her at odds with her caregivers and at odds with me. It took a while for me to fully get it, I will admit, but eventually I did, and I even came to value and respect it, though it could still be challenging in the moment. My mom's caregivers, especially the team we've had the last 2 years, including these past difficult 10 months of COVID, have been a true blessing. Suzette Sebastian, Beverly Fuller, Charmaine Lewis, and Ornelia Castro. They all gave of themselves in so many ways in how they cared for my mom. They went the extra mile again and again, with attentiveness, patience, understanding, and kindness. This was true also for Donna Farkas and Lauren Zappel, who oversee the small home care business that we've had the pleasure of working with over these years since our father took ill in 2008. Peter and I, our partners and our children, are all enormously grateful to all of you. Even with the profound sense of loss that I feel and know will grow deeper in the days ahead, as I continue to think of things I want to share with my mom and suddenly realize that I can't, I am so filled with gratitude for who my mother was and how blessed we were to have her with us for so long. Zichrona livracha. May her memory always be for blessing.
Thank you, Ruth. That was extraordinary and exquisite. What a blessing. I want to invite Rabbi Dr. Ruvain Firestone to come up with you, Rabbi Ruth, to read some words from your sons, and then we'll hear from a couple of more friends before we move over to the burial.
So this is from Noam. I wanted to share a few memories of Lotte, or Omi, as my siblings and cousins knew her. Omi always made herself available and was delighted whenever I, her other grandchildren, and family members spent time with her. Her joy was palpable when she heard our names after picking up the phone. I fondly remember the times we visited Omi and Opa's house in Teaneck, where I fondly remember doing puzzles, playing outside, and having the classic Omi and Opa breakfast, soft-boiled eggs and toast with a choice of butter, jam, and smoked whitefish. Over the years, Omi and Opa spent the winters in Los Angeles, giving us many opportunities to spend quality time together. I'm grateful to have had Omi living in LA these past 13 years, so that she could regularly come for dinner and celebrate Shabbat and other special occasions with the family. One of our favorite things to do together whenever I visited was to go out for sushi. Omi loved it when she was encouraged to try new types of Japanese food, and I had fun ordering dishes for her to try. While we ate sushi and talked, I would joke around sarcastically, waiting expectantly for the retaliatory eye roll and amused look she would give me, saying, "You think I would believe anything." These experiences and many others are examples of the great times Omi had with her family. Her apartment was a testament to it. The walls and surfaces were full of photos of her family interspersed with art pieces that her grandchildren had made over the years. Omi also could be extremely goofy. She was famous for corny birthday poems and would sometimes surprise us by being unexpectedly silly. Once on a family vacation on Catalina Island, she caught me and my siblings off guard by insisting on playing Cards Against Humanity with us. "Grandmas can play too," she said. And she did, putting down some surprising card combinations that were sufficiently inappropriate and hilarious. Omi loved telling and retelling stories. If you spent time with her, you would have likely heard about her first date with Opa, about her and her family growing up in Switzerland, going to school there as the only Jew, and celebrating Passover in 1933. She once told me that it comforted her that even though we did not get a chance to know her parents and parts of her family, she felt that we knew them through the stories she told. I'm grateful for all the good times I had with Omi. She is and will continue to be fiercely missed.
And these are some words from Amir. Some of my earliest memories of Omi were of sitting with her on this old black leather couch in Omi and Opa's house in Teaneck. Omi would come over with a stack of books and ask me which one I wanted to read with her. When I was a little older, she would sit down with me on that couch and ask to see my homework. At the time, I could never understand why she was so excited about homework. Of course, Omi was a teacher. She had a lifelong passion for teaching, a love for it, and a deep pride in doing it. She told about how she wasn't allowed to become a teacher at first because of her foreign accent, and how happy she was when she finally could. And many years after she had retired, she still volunteered to teach and tutor young children. As one of her grandchildren, the fact that she was a teacher was never lost on me. And in later years, as Omi began sharing more childhood memories and old stories, I started learning so much more from her and about her through those stories. In one story, Omi talked about a new game her father had gotten her that she brought to school to play with other children. One girl said that Omi shouldn't get a turn even though it was her game because she was, quote, only a Jew, quote. Omi got up and walked away. But her teacher came over to that girl and said very sternly, "We don't have any onlys in this class. We only have people." Another story Omi told me was about her homeroom teacher, Mr. Nash, who had had a stroke, and how she would help him into his coat every day at the end of class. One day he asked her, "Woher kommst du?" Where are you from? You're not Swiss. Her friends explained to her after class that Mr. Nash didn't like Jews, but Omi never stopped helping him into his coat. When her friends asked why, she'd say, "He can't get into his jacket and it's cold," and that she couldn't just let him go outside without his jacket. Omi told me that Mr. Nash's wife came to school once and thanked her, adding that in St. Gallen, everybody knew everything. In these stories, I'd hear again and again about Omi's classmates and especially her teachers and the impressions they made on her. Some of her teachers helped her make sense of the world in a confusing, tumultuous time. Other teachers stood up for her. Some helped instill values in her, and others, like Mr. Nash, put those principles to the test. But I think teachers and school were more than that for her. They were an anchor, a constant through her childhood amid the big life changes she went through. Over the last days, as I was thinking about Omi's stories, rereading some that I'd written down, I was struck again by the incredible lightness, by the innocent and playful tone in Omi's stories, and by how she would always tell them with such fondness. All this despite everything Omi lived through. her childhood being uprooted by World War II. It was astounding to me that despite everything Omi lived through, there was never any anger, never any bitterness. Omi was always so full of empathy and openness to other people. It was never hard to imagine my Omi being that same little girl who'd help Mr. Nash into his jacket every day, even when she knew he didn't like Jews. And when, several years ago, I started learning German and made plans to live in Berlin, Omi never questioned it. In fact, she was delighted to speak German with me and would keep telling me how happy this would have made her father. I've been thinking a lot about this over the last days, about Omi's enduring empathy and openness, what she'd lived through, and her stories, one in particular. A few years ago, Omi told me about a classmate of hers from Forest Hills High School after she arrived in America, who would help her with English in return for help in math. This girl was from the South, and after she saw that Omi was playing sports and eating with the black girls, she told Omi that she should never eat with blacks. Omi couldn't understand why not, and argued with this girl for a long time, but couldn't convince her. Telling the story, Omi explained to me how shocked she was by racism in America. She thought that this group against group thing was Hitler's thing, and couldn't understand why this prejudice also existed in America for other groups. Then Omi said, "Well, I don't think it hurt me." I wondered at the time exactly what Omi meant. How could this not hurt and leave her sad and disheartened? But now what I believe she meant is that while her experiences with prejudice and racism in America clearly pained her, they never turned her into a bitter person, never made her angry. And this is a lesson I really hope to take away from her. Despite the difficult times Omi lived through, they didn't hurt who she was, an incredibly open, empathic, and loving person who I had the great fortune of calling Omi.
I want to say I knew that hearing about Lotte in this way would continue to enrich our lives. And even in the past week, I've learned so much, not only about her, but from her. And I know that she will continue to be our teacher for many, many years to come. We're going to hear now from Barbara Wetstein, very, very dear friend of the family, and then from Sherry Davis and Benny Ferdman. We'll hear brief remarks.
So when you're part of academia and families, can't hear me? Is that better? Okay. I have a fear of microphones. Okay. When you're part of an academic community and you move around a lot, friends become family. And the Sohn Firestones were among those for us who became family. And one of the really nice gifts is that, the side gifts, is that their family becomes family. So we came to know Lotte quite well. And when Ruth told me that she had died, I had all these small, random memories of her. And Ruth, your words, it's like a link. Her story feels like a link to these memories. So I'll just share a few of them, just sort of random Lotte memories. Of course, a lot of Shabbat and holiday meals together, in which she shared with us the stories from Switzerland, and we benefited from them, and all kinds of stories. And my children asked her questions. And when my son Jonathan went into the teaching field, her interest in what was going on in teaching and her conversations, I remember looking up and seeing them in a corner talking about teaching. It was really a wonderful, those conversations that you said, you look up and you see her speaking to somebody with intense interest. We benefited from as well. My mother moved to LA shortly after, about 3 years after my father died, and lived here for 3 years. And my father died shortly after Hans died. And so Ruth and I decided we'd make a shidduch between the two of them. Ironically, my parents lived in Teaneck, where where Hans and Lotte lived, and so sometimes would wave to each other. They lived literally a couple of blocks away. But when my mother moved here, we sort of thought, okay, let's set up some play dates between the two moms. And one point, my mom was living in an assisted living, and Ruth thought, gee, that would be probably really nice for my mother. So we had Lotte go visit her in the assisted living, and it didn't work out. As Ruth said, they were both not that their relation didn't work out, her moving to an assisted living didn't work out, and they were both very independent and stubborn with an S, capital S, women. Lotte shared with me that the reason she would never move to a place like that is because she wanted to be in the home that she and Hans had here in LA together. That her home was the only place that she felt she had the ending memories with Hans. And I really, came to understand that. On another occasion, I found myself, when Ruth and Ruvain were overseas, I found myself in Irene's on Robertson Avenue. It's a dress shop, with my mother and Lotte, because Lotte wanted to buy a new dress for some occasion, I can't remember. And we spent this sort of girls' afternoon out at Irene's, trying on dresses in dressing rooms. I don't know if you remember that, Ruth. It was hilarious. Now, we all walked out with nothing bought, and that's because both my mother and Lotte were very stubborn, and no matter how much I said, gee, that looks nice, that looks wonderful, neither of them would agree. So, but it was a lovely afternoon. And one last memory, Ruth and I had dinner with our mothers at her house. I don't know if you remember this. And we were talking about how hard it is to live alone. Both of them had long marriages with husbands that they adored, and it was very hard for them to live alone. And Ruth and I looked at each other, and then we said to them, well, wouldn't you think about like moving in with a friend or something like that? And at the same moment, the two of them turned to us and said, no, never. And at that moment, we realized we were a generation apart there. I think Ruth and I were very lucky to have these wonderful mothers. Lotte was a wonderful mother. She was a wonderful friend. And Howie and I are very lucky to have known both of Ruth's parents and benefited. We feel privileged to have known them. Yehei Zichronah Livracha.
So we are going to share this reading of Lotte. It's listening to everything, these beautiful words from everybody. I see so many interconnected themes. So everything we are saying is so connected to everything that was said before us. Memories of Lotte. Our memories of Lotte are always around a Shabbos or holiday table over many, many years here in Los Angeles. At Ruth and Ruvain's Shabbos table or at our house for our vegan Thanksgiving dinner, Lotte always greeted us with warmth and genuine happiness and interest. Always elegantly dressed, I think every time I saw her, I complimented her on her outfit, and I really meant it. I still can visualize her outfits and the colors of her suits and her jewelry.
A wise and wonderful presence at the Shabbos, at the table for Shabbos meals, together with Ruth, and as she used to say, her favorite son-in-law, Ruvain. She was always grateful to be present and share memories of a life well lived and of a youth turned upside down.
Stories were at the heart of conversations with Lotte. The details of her happy and secure childhood in Europe before the war, the narrative of her journeys across continents, always close to the surface, to be recounted and shared as if the retelling anchored her in her deepest sense of self, a place she felt most home. Her stories linked past and present, her youth, her memories of her beloved husband, her deep devotion to her children, and her enthusiastic and proud reports of her grandchildren.
Lotte had a lot to share with my mother, who is also buried here, over there, and who also journeyed far from her childhood home. As they sat together around our Thanksgiving table, they both were always eager to share what they were thankful for. Both of them had a lot to be thankful for. And we are also thankful and blessed to have had Lotte in our lives. Soll sich haben a lichtige Gan Eden.
So the hour is growing late, and this is one of the days every 3 years where it's appropriate to wear a coat in Los Angeles, and it looks like it's about to rain. So I will just say very briefly a couple of words because we've already heard so much beauty and so much wonder. And thank you to Barbara and Sherry and Benny for adding to this chorus of memories of Lotte today. I will just share that there are, as many of you know, many different kinds of miracles in our tradition. The miracles that we read about in Sefer Shemot in the book of Exodus this week and for the last couple of weeks, these are miracles that are great and awesome. These are miracles of frogs and lice, boils and darkness and splitting seas. These miracles are gifts from God, completely beyond our control and outside our ability to even fully comprehend. But there are also other kinds of miracles that we recognize in our tradition. These don't manifest as hail and boils and mountains on fire, but they're no less worthy of our awe and wonder. These miracles come about when a person or people work to create a kind of reality that's not against the laws of nature, but does reflect an extraordinary and rare act of courage and moral clarity. Rava taught of these kinds of miracles, La Semchina Nanisa. We have to take action rather than wait around for miracles to happen. And the action itself becomes the miracle. I say this because it's very clear that Lotte Sohn's life was a miracle. You heard Ruth talk earlier about the incredible story of her family's escape from Europe just at the cusp of the war. Amidst the rising tide of hatred against the Jewish community, Lotte's father, Heinrich, saw ominous signs of catastrophic danger to German Jews, and through sheer force of will was able to save their family and their whole extended family as well. Since I heard this story for the first time, I've been playing it over and over in my mind. Lotte's life, Liesel's life, their mother's, and the life of the whole family. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that they were miraculously saved. She is a miracle. And what that means, Ruth, is that you're also a miracle. And so is Peter. And so are Jennifer and Rebecca and Rachel and Noam and Amir. In the face of great miracles, all we can do is stand in awe and give thanks. The language that our tradition gives to miracles is Baruch shegemalani kol tov. Thank you for allowing this goodness to come to me. We know that Lottie's father died shortly after he was able to pull the family out of Germany. The miracle of this foresight, the strength of his will, and the tragedy of his death became the twin foundational forces in Lottie's life, as we've heard. I want to just point out today that Lottie was not a person to waste the miracles or the tragedies. From her young age, when she experienced these foundational events, she went on to build a life of the deepest love and greatest devotion. Hans also was a miracle, his own family, among the last Jews to escape Europe between 38 and 41. And the love between the two of them was born as a double miracle. It was the great blessing of their lives and also of yours, showing you how much they loved one another. That love manifested in many ways over the course of many, many years. That two people plucked from the fires of Europe and dropped down in the United States a world away were able to find one another is miracle enough. That they were able to build a life of love, of gentle harmony, of joy, of mutual respect and care is something truly extraordinary. And that they were able to transmit that love to their children and to theirs is a testament to how real and unequivocal it was. We have learned so much about Lottie through the course of this beautiful service and tribute to her, her devotion, her incredible love. I have to imagine that her miraculous escape from the fate that so many European Jews met planted the seed in her that life was not to be taken for granted and that every single day, every moment was both a gift and an opportunity. I have to just say that I loved watching Lottie at Ikar. She obviously came week after week because she just wanted to spend time with you, Ruth and Ruvain. But she also seemed to actually like it. Sometimes we would do something particularly experimental or kind of weird, and I would look over at Lottie to see how she would take it in, 90 years old. I suspected this wasn't the Judaism that she grew up with. She had an astonishing willingness to grow and learn and experience new things that I think was really characteristic of her. She was, as they say, ahead of her time. I loved her tenderness. I loved her acceptance, her kindness, and her curiosity. I know that this is a really hard time to lose a loved one. Peter and Carol, Rachel, Veronica, Noam, and Amir, Jennifer, and Rebecca, I know that it's very hard for you not to be here today. Not to place earth on Lottie's grave, as we will in just a moment now. Not to weep together and laugh together and hug and go home and eat as we tell stories about Lottie and reflect and remember. Instead, we're all going to have to find other ways to grieve in this time, to lift up her memory and to reclaim and reconnect with who she was. We, your communities, your colleagues, your friends, we will draw you close in the days ahead, creating sacred containers to hold your grief and adding our own memories of Lottie to yours. I pray that as you move through this time, you'll remember the miracle that Lottie Sohn was in this world, that somehow from the start, she grew into a person who could embody such love and such hopefulness even still. In the days ahead, even as you feel her absence, may your hearts be filled with love. May her extraordinary life remind us of the possibility of miracles in this world, not the supernatural miracles, but those of courageous foresight, persistent and consistent love, and fierce dedication. Lottie, may your memory always be a blessing to your family, to our community, and to all of us. Zichrona livracha. I'm going to invite us now to please rise and come close, and each of us will participate in whatever way we're able in the act of burial.
Also, we could try to use this shovel over on the left-hand side for the purposes of the live stream, just so they can actually see the people who are facing her. And if you guys want to come around this way, just so we don't trip over that cable there.
going to invite you all to come close again for just a moment so we can say El Malay Rachamim and Mourner's Kaddish. We're on the bottom of page 18 if you want to follow along. Miriam, okay. El Malay Rachamim Shelchem Bamromim המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה הם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מסירים את נשמת לאה בת נפתלי ומרים שהלכה לעולמה בעל הרחמים יסתיריה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה אדוני הוא נחלתה ותנוח ושלום על משכבה ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, eternal spirit of the universe, we ask that you grant complete rest in your sheltering presence to Lotte Sohn, who has entered eternity. Please God, sheltered by your divine wings, may she be bound up in the bond of eternal life. The eternal God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. Amen. And if you turn to page 31, we'll say Mourner's Kaddish. And I want to invite those who are grieving, who are with us virtually also, to please hear our Amen, those who are not mourners, Avelim here, and hear it also to your Mourner's Kaddish as well, today and in the days ahead. Amen. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Omaya Yitzarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei Dekudsha Brechu Le'ela Minkol Birchata V'shirata Tush B'chata V'nechemata Da'amiran Be'alma V'imru Amen Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu V'kol Yisrael V'imru Amen Osei Shalom B'mramav Huya Asei Shalom Aleinu V'kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Traditionally, at the end of a burial, we'll form two lines that the mourners will walk through, and there are very few of us who are allowed to be here today, obviously because of COVID. And so, I just want to invite us to, at a safe distance from each other, we'll form two parallel lines, and Ruth and Ruvain, on behalf of Peter and Carol, Jennifer and Rebecca, Rachel and Noam and Amir will walk through the lines, and we can offer the traditional words of consolation as they go, or whatever words are in your heart as we commit to standing by your side through this time of grief in the days ahead. Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar v'lei Tzion b'Yerushalayim. Please God, I pray that you find comfort and consolation in the days ahead among all the brokenhearted of our people and of all people. May Lotte's memory be a blessing.